بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألف لام را تلك آيات الكتاب وقرآن مبين ربما يود الذين كفروا لو كانوا مسلمين ذرهم يأكلوا ويتمتعوا ويلههم الأمل فسوف يعلمون وما أهلكنا من قرية إلا ولها كتاب معلوم ما تسبق من أمة أجلها
So I guess we will begin with 1948, which is kind of like the genesis for many things. I mean, first of all, from the Israeli side, this is the Israeli War of Independence. From the Palestinian side, this is Nakba, right? This is a disaster. This is ethnic cleansing after ethnic cleansing. This is slowly watching villages that had Arabic names be depopulated, slowly get taken over by settlers, get replaced with Hebrew names. And these are names that you could see now, right? There's many maps going around online that most people, they probably haven't seen, and they should really take a look at to see exactly what it was before and after, right? And there's a few things before we get into 1948 that I think are very telling. So first of all, in the last few years, for the first time, I read the Israeli Declaration of Independence, which I believe was actually written by David ben-Gurion, or at least he was the one that actually delivered it. And during the course of this Declaration of Independence, there's this extreme emphasis on international law, right? That Israel wishes to establish itself under the auspices of the international system. And why is that? It's very simple. Israel understood that for it to have any kind of legitimacy and longevity, it's going to need to be under the auspices of the law, right? And the ironic thing now is decades later, after extracting everything that it could from international law, it now turns its back on it, right? It says the law doesn't matter. In my personal life, when I argue with people that I've known growing up with, Jews in New York City, for instance, they would often say international law doesn't matter, right? This is a very kind of self-serving thing to say, but nonetheless, this is the argument. But putting in the context of what was said in 1948 versus now, I think it's very telling. The second thing is, despite this discussion of the law, the declaration does not mention even the possibility of a Palestinian state. And I think really the root of everything is this. No international body, nation, whatever, has adequately dealt with what happened back then, right? Nobody dealt with the fact that we did see a true ethnic cleansing in the classical sense. Nobody made plans to either give some sort of compensation or really kind of resolve the refugee question. And Norman often says that, people say all the time that this is such a complex conflict, and it's not, right? This is basically a conflict over land. And we would see it, I think, in the next couple of centuries, it will be viewed in the same way that we view, for instance, the land conflict between colonists in America and Native Americans, right? We don't moralize anymore about, oh, isn't it so bad how we had, for instance, Native American terrorism? We simply point out, well, there's a causal chain that leads exactly to that outcome. So we need to deal with that causal chain. So maybe we could start with Arwa or Musa. I'm not sure if Musa is able to be heard or seen right now, but just kind of like whoever wants to, I guess, take the question of that refugee experience, what that was like, maybe stories that you heard from your family, and the long-term ramifications of this into the present day.
Yeah, it's interesting to talk about the very personal experience. As a refugee, my parents left Palestine, or were driven out from Palestine in 1949, not 48. The last village, I guess the last village, occupied by the Israeli army. I heard, lots of stories from my parents, especially my father, who was a volunteer with the Egyptian, although he was, 16, but he was a volunteer with the Egyptian army. And his village was, sieged for 6 months. And then they had to leave, they left with nothing, and with promises that they will get back in weeks, in days. But since then, and ironically, my father believed that he will go back. My grandfather refused to leave, and he was killed by a grenade, by by a gun grenade. And they came here with nothing, and they lived in tents. Ironically, my father always believed that he will go back to his village. He told stories about the battles, small battles, the siege of our village, which was called Iraq al-Manshiyah, now replaced by an Israeli town called Kiryat Gat. It was a plain land, with more than 30 springs. They grew oranges. They kept cows. They were also hospitable to the Egyptian army. They slaughtered cows for the Egyptian army, believing that the Egyptian army will protect them from the Israeli gangs. They came here near Hebron, and I was born in a tent. I was brought for my 6 years in a tent, in the snow, in the cold, all the people, my mother and my family were in a small tent. It was not I still remember the tent, although I am old enough to forget. But my father, when he was he became rich after that, and he refused to build a permanent house. He put the roof from metal, thinking that one day he will go back. He said, it's not my place to stay here forever. And he died with this hope, unfortunately.
Musa,
Yes.
did you think he would go back?
Yes, I think if not, my father died, and maybe I will die. But I think, one day, maybe my grandsons will go back. Still, when they are asked where you are from, they said, from Iraq al-Manshiyah, their original village. We don't, believe me, we don't belong to the place we are in. We live in Hebron and Ramallah. We don't belong to this place. And the people, all the people, not us, even in the camp, in the refugee camp where my family lived, they still, the streets are, named after their villages. We say Iraq al-Manshi Street, Beit Jibrin, where my wife is from, another village. It's their quarter, their street. People never forget. But they also, they're not, they're not dreaming, but they know the reality the Palestinians they are in these days. But they never, give up hope that they will one day. And now politically, I say that Israel will not live forever in the area. Many Palestinian, most Palestinian, believe that Israel is in an island among hundreds of millions of Arabs. They are now weak. They are, but it's the history will not go this way forever.
I have
For me, it was an experience which made me sad, and my sadness also was reflected to my children, and I think it's not an easy experience to live in a camp, and here still people it's different. The camp, I don't know, Norman maybe knows what life is like in a camp, but it's different from a village. It's different from the city. Our camp, Pawar camp, where Norman visited, is 1 square kilometer with 12,000 people now, and many of them left to Jordan in 1967. Otherwise it would be 20,000 people. So life, for the refugees is not, easy, and whatever compensations will be given to Palestinians will not make up for this, deep suffering, for everyone. Those who died, poor, those who, those who dreamed to go back. So it's not it's a unique experience. It's different from other refugees. Maybe I think it's not from any other refugees in any part of the world, and it's a long experience. Now 74 years.
I want to hear from Sana because her family also became refugees in 1948. I'm just going to ask a question, but we'll hold off the answer. The question I want to ask both Musa and Sana and Arwa and Muin is the following. The question is, Professor Chomsky, who you all know, he has said on many occasions that it's immoral, it's not moral, it's immoral to tell Palestinians that they are going to return home, meaning the refugees, telling the refugees that they are going to return home when everybody knows they're not going to return home. So it's immoral to lie to them and give them hopes when the hopes are not realistic. So I would like to hear all of your responses to that. But before we get to that, I would like to hear Sana's story and then Muin's.
Okay. Probably my story or the story of my dad is similar to the story told by Musa. However, my father came from a very small village, very small. It's called Alma, and it's in the province of Safad. It's so small that they had no TV, of course, no radio, no newspaper. So they were not actually aware of what's going in the world. It was a very peaceful village. Most of them were farmers, poor, of course, very poor farmers, taking care of the land. His mom and his dad would go from the morning to collect olives, leaving 12 children. They had 12 children with their grandmas. So what my father recalls is that they had no idea what was going on until they started hearing that the Jews are coming, Yahud, this is what they use, Palestinians would say Yahud are coming, and they were committing massacres in the nearby villages. So his dad put them all on a donkey and they went walking to South Lebanon. And it's like most of the stories that we read from Palestinian authors, that they did not realize that they became refugees until they were settled and they were not allowed to go back. What I wanted to say, they were such simple and naive people that they had no idea. They were not part of any conflict. For example, Musa just said that his dad was in the Egyptian army. My dad and his family, they were not at all involved in any conflict. And though they found themselves, they became refugees. Now, coincidentally, I was asking my sisters so that we can remember together before coming to this show about the stories that my dad used to tell us about becoming refugees and living in tents, like Musa said, in the cold weather and in a country that is based on structural racism against Palestinians. So in Lebanon, the racism that the Palestinians have faced is it's uncomparable to any other Arab countries where the Palestinians ended up. But coincidentally, there was this movie and everybody's talking about it, Farha, Farha, and the Israelis went crazy. Please, Norman, you watch it today. It's on Netflix. And I was watching it and I said, this is exactly the way my father used to describe his life in the village. Small village, poor people, they don't know what's going on in this world except their olive groves and their oranges, and suddenly they found out that they are kicked out of their countries. Whether I want to go back, now I'm a grandma, so my father is the refugee. My grandchildren, I'm sure they know that their father or their grandpa comes from Alma, and one day we will go back. And I have no doubt about going back to whether me, myself, or my children or my grandchildren. We will return, there is no doubt, to our villages. And Israel has no room to stay in this region. This is what I believe, Norman.
I'm not commenting. Muin.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think my story is perhaps a little atypical. My mother's family originates from what is now a town called Al-Fahim, which is either the largest or one of the largest Arab municipalities in what is now Israel. But she was born in Haifa. And then when she was about 2, the family moved to Akka. And in sharp contrast to the drivel produced by Joan Peters, who we know of today actually only because of Norman, otherwise an entirely forgettable author, my grandfather, after World War II, relocated to Homs in Syria in pursuit of work. And when the war broke out in late 1947, after the partition resolution, he sent for his wife and children, so my grandmother and my mother and her siblings, and they relocated to Damascus. And because they had Syrian relatives, were able to stay with them and avoid going to having to live in refugee camps. My father is from a village just outside Haifa named Tirat Haifa. It's today, it was demolished and renamed Tirat HaKarmel by the Israeli state. But he was born and raised in the neighborhood of Wadi Salib in the city of Haifa. And then when the war broke out in late 1947, either in the spring of 1948, my father was orphaned at a young age, I should have added. And his mother, together with my father, my uncle, and my 2 aunts, left Wadi Salib in Haifa and went to back to Haifa, and were on the last boat that left from there to southern Lebanon, and in fact escaped just in time because Haifa was the last village in the Haifa district to fall to the Zionist militias, and a large massacre was committed there at the time of the conquest of that village. So my father and his family got out just in time, were in Lebanon for some time, then moved to Damascus, where my father started working in a textile factory owned by a wealthy Syrian who took a liking to my father and was able to, and funded him to finish his secondary school education in Syria after working hours. And then through a happy coincidence, one might say, my father's brother-in-law, who was Pakistani, was a judge at the International Court of Justice in The Hague, arranged for my father to come to Holland and study in the Netherlands. And that's how my family ended up in Holland, which is where I was born and raised. And so, although very much the child of refugees, my experience of being a Palestinian refugee played out primarily in Western Europe rather than the Middle East.
Arwa, would you like to speak to how do you understand yourself? Do you understand yourself as being from Hebron district? Do you understand yourself as being a villager in what's now Israel? How do you trace back your roots?
Norman, as my father said, whenever anyone asked us, where are you from? We said, we are from Iraq and Manshia. We didn't stop saying this, and I think we will not stop. When I was a kid, I always believed that we will return back to Iraq and Manshia, but I was thinking in a very romantic way, thinking maybe this will be next year, few months, and we will come back. Now, I still believe that we will go back to Iraq al-Manshia, not Iraq al-Manshia as a village, but I mean, I believe that the occupation can't last forever. The logic of oppression cannot last forever. So the occupation will end one day, and Palestine will be free one day. So all these villages will be free one day, and we'll be able to go there. Then will be our choice to decide to stay in Iraq al-Manshia or not. So I was thinking about what you said about Noam Chomsky. I don't know, maybe Noam Chomsky was saying this, thinking about the possibilities, but the possibilities of the our current time. But I believe that occupation cannot last forever, and oppression cannot last forever. So I really believe that Palestinians will go back to their homelands one day, and yeah, that's it. I believe I'm from Iraq and Manshia.
Just there is mistake when we refer to the the reality with the term occupation. I think we are facing a fascist state called Israel. And the occupation sometimes is something misleading, a misleading term. Israel occupied the whole Palestine, the Israeli gangs, the villages and the cities, and so when I stick to the hope, I think fascism will be defeated. All fascists, through all the whole history, where fascist countries were defeated. And Israel is not, it will not be different. This is, what makes us stick to the hope. And I agree with Arwa. We have here, a home in Ramallah and a home in Hebron. And when it comes, it will be everyone's choice to go back. But it's a right. This is, the difference. It's a right. And I don't think, one Palestinian will give up this right.